I think we'll get started. Call to order. It is 12:01 on March
Can't
20th.
shut that all the way, please, because it's a public meeting.
Oh, you just want it open?
Yeah, it's best in case members of the public want to.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The first item is any public comments. I will remind anybody they have a 3-minute time limit. Is there anybody online from the public that wishes to speak? And anyone here that wishes to speak for the public? Hearing none, we will jump to the next agenda item, which is the approval of the February 27th meeting minutes. Has anybody read or has everybody read, and does anybody have any comments about the minutes from last meeting that they wish to adjust? All right, hearing none, consider the meeting minutes from February 27th approved. And then our next agenda item is review and discussion of the CCC planning procedural steps and existing building needs.
All right, so this is where we circle back to us as staff. And it's been a journey now. We've visited other locations, we've toured our own facilities, and so we wanted to sort of reiterate and bring back together why we're doing this in the first place. So the purpose of this particular meeting is really to encourage a shared vision for the community campus. So you all are about to make some pretty big recommendations to what the future of our downtown will look like. And to have that as a shared vision for the whole community will be really important. So after this meeting, hopefully we'll have grown some insight into the history of planning in Middleton. We each have several pieces of history that we would like to show. You're in for a real treat with some historical gems that Abby found. We will hopefully have some clarity gained on the mission of the committee, as well as the timeline. We'll review dates here in a sec. And we'll hopefully feel more confident advocating for the project. We have a couple more months of meetings, and from then we need to really work on communicating what that looks like. And there'll be opportunities for you to continue that service if you choose, but no matter what, you're still gonna get asked about it from your family or your neighbors or your friends. And so it'll be important to know how to talk about it in a way that's productive, that's genuine to your own interests and values, and what is represented from the community. So we started off with 6 original goals. We ended up nixing one because it was determined that the public-private partnership was off the table for this project. So here's our 5. So at this point in time, the staff team is working to hone down and craft the key messages that come out of the goals. So no one's going to remember word for word or even necessarily the order of 5 goals, but we can remember 2 or 3 key messages. And so we're working on the messaging around what that will look like. And right now it's narrowed down to, we need to modernize our facilities. We need to use the land efficiently. We need to meet the space needs. Specifically of the 3 entities that have been lined out with the senior center, the library, and City Hall. We need to address capital maintenance in the short term and the long term. We need to be able to accommodate growth. And we also need to build sustainable buildings that will reach our goals. So those goals will work into what our messaging will look like in the near future here. So to look at what those space needs are, we've got a unified approach here to the library needs to increase its space by about 143%. The senior center needs to increase space by 45%, and City Hall by 50%. So not only do we really value history in the historical perspective, but we think it's really important to be able to look back in time to see how did we get here. And I like this quote from Churchill because the further back you look, the further forward you can see. I really like that metaphor of looking forward into the future. Abby's going to share some documents with you that are from decades and decades and decades ago. And we're creating documents right now that people will look at decades and decades from now. So a quick look at where did we come from? How did we get here? Who are we? And where do we want to go as we make these big recommendations?
All right. So I'll go over the Middleton City Hall portion of the presentation. Before I get started, I just wanted to share that last year our city council allocated some funding for our department to scan our old plan commission files, or our PC files as we call them, in order to preserve them. We had several files that were starting to disintegrate, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that historical perspective. So if you will indulge me for a bit, I'm going to walk you through some of the information that we found in the original City Hall file, which was PC 103, to provide a history of this building that you are sitting in today. So in the early 1960s, there was a building committee that was going through a very similar process to the one that you are going through today. Middleton became a city in 1963 and was planning to build its first city hall. The committee was evaluating 8 different sites, which you can see kind of outlined in the red on the screen, for the new city hall location, and had recommended that City Hall be a 1-story building and be located at the intersection of Allen Boulevard and Mendota Avenue, what is presently Lakeview Park in Middleton. Former Mayor A.M. McDermott, who, if we were sitting in the council chambers, you would actually get to see a picture of A.M. McDermott on the left-hand side of the portraits of the mayors. And a few committee members took a trip to Oshkosh for the grand opening of their 4-story city hall to look at the arrangement and layout of city departments, and also examined the exterior of the Beaver Dam City Hall on the way there, very similar to the tours that you all took to look at other facilities. And within our files, we actually found the reimbursement request from Dr. McDermott for 10 cents a mile, as well as $5 for the lunch for the 4 of them that they enjoyed while they were taking their tour. A user origin study was conducted to determine a good location for the site, and we found handwritten calculations for how many users the new city hall should accommodate. The number was 70, which is the sum total of 50 citizens, 9 elected officials, the same number that we have today, 5 city employees, 2 police officers, and 4 library staff members. But not everyone was happy with the selected location. Downtown Middleton businesses wanted their new civic building to be located downtown to create synergies between government, business, and commerce. The planning director at the time agreed with the business community and advocated for a downtown location in a special edition of the Middleton Times-Tribune, which ran on April 15th, 1964. Local businesses took out a full-page ad encouraging a downtown location for the city hall. Some of these businesses that advertised you will recognize today. They include Clausen's Bakery, Middleton Ford, and others. We also have letters in our files from residents at the time advocating for other locations as well. As I was looking through these files, what really impressed me about these is how much residents and businesses really took pride in their civic building as a cornerstone of the new city identity. And ultimately, the business community won out and City Hall was built on this current site. So here's the history of how the City Hall has served several purposes and functions over the last 60 years. The original building housed the library and the police department. In 1974, there was an addition made to expand the library. In 1990, the library moved across the street to their current location. And then many of you probably remember in 2009 when the police department moved to their current location on Donna Drive. In 2009, when the police department vacated the east side of this building, so that far side, other staff members were able to use that space, but there were no funds budgeted at that time to renovate the space, and there have been no significant renovations to the building since before 2009. In large part, this is due to the council and the staff's uncertainty about the future of this building and whether or not it made financial sense to invest in the building if City Hall weren't staying here long-term. So in recent years, with this building, we have really begun to feel the pinch in terms of having adequate space to accommodate our current staff. Our city council budgeted for some additional positions in 2025, this year. And we have consolidated our 5 interns to the space that is shown in the picture on the right-hand side of the slide so that we can free up cubicle space for the new permanent positions. However, even with that, there is at least one new permanent position that is budgeted that is on hold for hiring because a space has not yet been identified for that employee. As the city continues to grow, more staff will be needed to meet the community needs, and we do not have workspaces available. One of the topics that we have focused on and discussed in these meetings is the lack of handicap access to the lower level on the east side of the building. We are unable to use that basement level for staff due to accessibility requirements, so that area is primarily used for storage. And if you weren't able to take the tour, you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, that is the basement that leads down to the lower level on that side of the building. Another concern with this building that should be addressed through this project is consolidating the points of service in the building. We currently have 2 on the first floor and 1 in the basement level. And the one that is in the basement level in Public Works is accessible because that is on the west side of the building and that there is an elevator down to that basement level. Another big concern that we've heard expressed from our staff is the lack of daylighting into office spaces in this building. While it is true in other areas of the building, it is especially prevalent on the east side of the building, which was originally the police department, and there were no windows into that space for security reasons. And there still are no windows into that space, and we have 17 people that are working in those areas without any access to daylight. As previously mentioned, there has been little investment into this building, primarily due to the uncertainty of its future. You can see in the photos, the exterior condition of the building includes several holes where birds are nesting, and the interior spaces also have not been updated in many years. Lastly, we are lacking modern office amenities. One example of this is that we do not have a break room. You can see in the pictures that we do have some small spaces that include a sink and a fridge area, but we don't have a break room for our staff with a table and chairs for places for people to sit and have lunch. So right now, currently, most of our employees are eating at their desks. I will turn it over to Tammy now to go over the senior center building needs.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I actually was able to come up with a original ledger from the very beginning of the senior center. And it was quite fascinating to read. And so I want to go over a little bit of just a brief history of our senior center and talk about senior centers a little bit across the nation. Of course, the very first senior center came to fruition in 1943. And it was in New York with the William Hodson Center, founded by the city of New York. Here and around the country, of course, with that original founding, senior centers really started to take off. And even more so during the 60s with the Older Americans Act. And today, as of 2023, there are 11,000 senior centers serving over 1 million older adults a day across the country. These centers are recognized in their communities as focal points, and they're widely used services by older adults. And I mentioned that ledger that I came across, and of course, the senior center program here in Middleton goes back clear to 1956. I bet a lot of folks didn't realize that it started as a community organization that a group of seniors called themselves the Golden Age Club. And that was actually very popular at different communities. A lot of centers sprung out of those clubs called the Golden Age Club. They just wanted to get together, socialize, support each other. And that club met at a variety of different locations. One was St. Luke's Fellowship Hall. And they were boasting they had 23 members. They were so proud. The senior center then really in about 1978 started to form kind of a formal board of directors. And they started meeting in the city hall building. And the program started to outgrow that space and eventually relocated to the old depot. Now I have no idea, I'm baffled as to how they were able to program in that small space, but they did up until 2000. And in 2000, the building that we're currently in, which was the former Bank of Middleton, became available and was purchased and remodeled at that time. And so since that time, we've been at our current location, and it has continued to grow. And the program's continued to grow since 1956. That says a lot to me. It's a very strong program. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the national statistics in relationship to the Middleton program. But keep this in mind, by 2040, 1 in 5 Americans will be age 65 or older. And that's up from about 1 in 8 in 2000. By 2034, the United States is expected to enter a demographic shift where adults age 65 and over outnumber children in the population. And that's for the first time ever. If we look a little bit at our population here in Middleton, one of the statistics that really stands out is that age group of 30 to 64. They're 43% demographics for people 30 to 64. So those folks are all beginning to come down the line. At age 65 to 84, 15% of the population. And of course, it goes down a little bit, 1.52 for people who are 85 and over. If you look at Dane County as a whole, which we have to do, we are part of the Dane County region as well. By 2030, we'll have over 169,000 individuals who are 55 and over. By 2040, we're going to have over 190,000. And again, by 2050, 213,000 people in this area will be over 55 or over. So those are important statistics in relationship to senior center growth, and as we're experiencing it. I put together just a few statistics to give you an idea of the growth. Some of this is just come out in our annual report. We had the top 5 areas of growth in 2024, and that is the largest area of growth has been assistance and resources. We're providing a lot of assistance and resources to our people in the local community. I expect that to increase with the way things are changing rapidly on the federal scene. Social events were very popular, fitness and exercise, education, health screenings. But I think couple of numbers that really tell it best, and that is how many newsletters do we send out in a year? We mailed out 21,000 newsletters in 2024. We also had 25,000 downloads from a website of newsletters. I just think that's spectacular. And if we look at our total service statistics, I went back to 2017. We actually have a computer program at the center that gives us the statistics when people check in. You can see obviously the effects of COVID, but if we look at the last 3 years coming out of COVID in 2022, we had 19,503 people served. 2023, 36,907 people. We look at 2024 and we know why we're so exhausted over there, because we had 48,983 people that we served through one avenue or another. at the center. I don't see that slowing down. We are continually having more and more days where every room is full. This afternoon, our entire basement area has programs in every single room. And the difficult part of that, of course, is, when you took a tour, you have to walk through and interrupt one class or program to get to the next room, and then everyone stares at you and says, "Why are you coming in here?" Programming is not just about your resources and your supplies. I think especially for a senior center, the building becomes vitally important when you talk about confidentiality, when you talk about security. And I kind of wrote down some of the considerations that do really go back to the current design of our building. Good ventilation systems, we learned this during COVID, are very important for people with compromised immune systems, which we have a number of seniors who have that situation. Design considerations for those who have memory and cognitive issues. That goes right down to the carpet selected, to the colors on the wall. All of those things have impact on people with cognitive issues. Building safety and security considerations, that includes manageable entrances and exits. If you've been through our building, you've seen where all the exits and all the entrances are. It becomes a bit of a maze over there. And you heard me mention already, building function is that very integral part of programming. Flooring that's all on one level. We do experience accidents in the building periodically where people trip and fall because of this. Of course, it was a bank. It was never designed to be what we're using it for today. Parking that allows easy access to the facility for those with mobility issues, so important for seniors. It's important 24/7, but in the wintertime, it becomes a real particular issue over there. And having enough space that just simply allows seniors to access the program that we're offering. We have waiting lists now for a lot of our programs. It is not unheard of to get more than 100 people at a program. We had 125 last week for Pi Day. And we have to cut those things off sometimes because of building codes and fire codes. So people are missing out because we don't have enough space. And of course, a strongly funded and updated facility adds to the quality of life of older adults. Our goal is to keep them in their own homes longer. Our goal is to delay chronic diseases and save on their healthcare costs, and also to reduce long-term care needs. So all of those things go hand in hand. And when I thought about this project and thought about how the synergy between all of the departments in the city becomes affected by how we're serving our residents, if we can keep people in their homes healthier, those are less EMS calls, those are less police calls. And the library offers the same sort of socialization. And I know Jocelyn is going to discuss that. So we're really fortunate. We have such a history here for older adults. And I know that we'll have a strong history in the future with all of those baby boomers coming down the road that I hope to see coming in our door. So I'll turn this over to Jocelyn.
Okay, I've got something similar to share. We'll review our timeline and then we'll have some time to ask questions. All right, the Middleton Public Library. Whenever I'm talking about the library in terms of long-term planning or future forward visions, I always like to show this slide. This is a screenshot of our midlibrary.org/history page. And it really lines out nicely not only the history of the library, but demonstrates how a public library is never really done evolving. As are most spaces that are used by the public for gathering. So in 1926, there was the Middleton Progressives Women Club who started a library by donating a shelf's worth of books in the Burmeister Cruise department store located on the corner of Hubbard and Parmenter. And then they took up enough books in 1927 to be opened up for business. Many public libraries were started by women's progressive groups, and they were not lending libraries, they were in the building use only libraries. In 1930, the Middleton Village Board offered the second story of Village Hall. So you can see even before this building was built, we already were sharing space with City Hall. This is a very common architectural strategy for public libraries. Many, many libraries across the country were either funded through Andrew Carnegie or some sort of civic combo. So a lot of public libraries and city halls were put together to begin with. And then in the 80s, we saw more like mid 70s to 80s, we saw a big shift in architecture with public libraries standing alone as their own building. And now in the early aughts, we're seeing just the opposite circling back around again, but in a little bit more creative way. So instead of just combining with civic services, we see library branches like Sequoia or some of the ones in Milwaukee partnering with a public-private partnership. So 1930 was technically our first shared space. From then, we go into the 50s and 60s in this building, and then the building across the street was built in 1990. One of the things that I really appreciate about all of our buildings, all three of these buildings, is that we as public servants throughout the decades have done a great job at making something that wasn't necessarily intended for its use of good use. This building has literally been more, 5 departments. Things have been able to grow and spring out of shared space where they have then been able to galvanize their own department worth of services. The library in 1990 was just built as one main level floor. And then in 2004, it was renovated below for an additional lower level. The thing that I like about that strategy is that we built it bigger than we thought we needed it, knowing that we could grow into the space. Until 2004, it was used as city storage for a variety of different departments, and was or could have been considered too big. Then in 2015, as you already know, the library board endeavored upon a space needs study that sort of catapulted this whole project forward. So then in 2019, we started working together on the best use of what is the best use of downtown city-owned land and where should those buildings go and about how much space are they going to take up. Not necessarily what will it look like or how are we going to use it yet, but just where does it need to go. We thought that in 2019, when we did the renovation for the Next Chapter project, we could really prototype and test a lot of these service models and theories that we wanted to see in a new building. So in other words, let's not wait for a new building to make some changes internally on how we approach efficiencies and operations. Let's see how we can make the most of this while we're planning in collaboration with other city departments. So we had the 3 goals of 1, improving the customer service experience. Abby mentioned that there's 3 points of service in City Hall. We also had 3 points of service within a 32 square foot building that had very specific functions at each desk. If you want to place a hold, you go here. If you want to check out, you go there. If you need technology help, you have to go here. So by improving the customer service experience, we endeavored on a huge organizational remodel, changed up our service model, we consolidated points of service, we rewrote job descriptions, we changed our org chart, we cross-trained, and now we do everything at every desk, just like we would do if we were in a brand new building. So we've already up-coached staff on that growth mindset of of being able to do things that were not necessarily part of the original design of how the building were to be used. We also created more square footage that was available to the public. While we all loved the giant arc to circulation, it was a huge barrier, not only to anyone who's in a wheelchair or shorter than 3 feet. It took up a lot of square footage. So when we consolidated those points of service, we looked at where can we squeeze out more square footage for the public. That included the lower level meeting room, the upstairs corner conference room, some other storage spaces that weren't being utilized very well. And we squeezed out another 3,000 square feet within that 32,000 square foot building with the Next Chapter project. And then the third goal of creating flexible spaces for new ways of gathering is really where we've settled in for the last 3 to 4 years now. So we've got the new service model, staff in their new positions, and we have a new way of working together and gathering. So when we say flexible spaces, we're looking at all of the hold shelving as you walk into the front of the building is all on wheels, and it can all be moved out of the way. For things like a giant planetarium program that's happening for all ages on April 21st. We can experiment with how we're using things and how we can gather in what we call the marketplace, or the space right across from that, the open area that has the orange carpeting, to do things like a showcase of the artist gallery. How can we maximize all of our reservable spaces in the building for larger functionings and spread the crowd out throughout the building so that we have a little bit safer approach at our entrances and exits? So we're having a lot of fun with those flexible spaces for new ways of gathering, and those are the types of ideas that we would take into a new building. And then last year, we just couldn't wait anymore. We updated the restrooms. So this wasn't part of the 2019 project, but this is one of those capital investments that we've been saying, oh, well, let's wait until we see what's going on with the community campus. Let's wait until we see what's happening with the long-term future of the building. And then at a certain point, now the project costs more and we're still dealing with those problems. So that about takes care of it for the building, besides our MEP, which we'll touch on here in a minute. So just like Tammy showed us with the statistics of aging adults, the community is growing in ways that we didn't necessarily expect or could foresee back in 2015 when we started this project. To accommodate and adjust, we're really good as employees about making it look better than it really is, or creating an experience that minimizes a lot of the pain points that we experience as staff, creating those experiences for people in spaces. So in order to accommodate the growth, we've added additional sessions of programming. So on any Storytime day, you can see 2 to 3 back-to-back programs, because if we had one, it's a disaster. It's too many people. It's uncomfortable. So we've done more things where we're multiplying the sessions, having either age-specific sessions or all ages sessions, depending on what type of experience we're providing. We've created more opportunities for connections and staffing efficiencies through those all ages programs. We often do not promote our programs because we don't want too many people to come. We bump up against fire code often, especially in the Archer room that holds 120 people. We often have to take registration for limited supplies or because of space, and we have a waiting list regularly for some larger programs. Operations have been greatly adjusted, and I'll show a few statistics here in a minute about how we're accommodating that. And we've added the bookmobile, which will be celebrated with a kickoff on Saturday, April 12th, 10 to 2, to support existing outreach and engagement efforts. So the bookmobile will not be adding a route with stops. It will be supporting everything that we're already doing that we need the vehicle to help to support. But what it does allow us is the potential to explore a route option in the future. So for example, if we wanted to have a route for holds pickup or Wi-Fi access that stopped at certain places at certain times, that's a scale up that the bookmobile would allow us to try. Things that are continued challenges, AMH is our automated materials handling. This is the sorter. It is a workhorse. It accounts for 2.5 FTE. So if it were to go down, we're looking at hiring over 4 to 6 pages to take on that work of individual handling of materials. That right now is being done automatically. We also had a sound test done, and it is 1 decibel under the threshold that is safe for an 8-hour workplace, according to OSHA. We have staff separated or doubled up in work areas, which makes collaborations and communications tricky. And we have a shrinking collection because we need to balance the need for people space. We are also ADA uncompliant in several areas, and we have 1 janitor's closet, the only slop sink on the main floor that's been identified as the one place where we could make a mother's nursing room to be in compliance with the Pump Act. So imagine being our cleaner and having to take a sloppy mop bucket down the elevator when you used to be able to dump it on one floor. A quick by the numbers here. Our visitors have been rebounding steadily each year since the pandemic. So you can see in 2019, it was one of our busiest years across the board. And as staff look back at 2019 as sort of like our peak performance year, it was unsustainable. We had over 35,000 people in the building every single month. We had tons of complaints about the noise, about unattended children, about that there wasn't enough seating. Things were uncomfortable in 2019. We're slowly approaching those numbers again. Since we're open on Sundays now, we'll start to see those extra 35 days or so that we're open really make a difference with the door counts. A couple of the things that we're keeping a close eye on in terms of space use is our study rooms. So from 2014 to 2024, our study room use has continued to increase, and we're almost maxed out on the availability of operational hours for study room use versus the use. So when we're looking at the possibility of a new building, things like individual or small group study rooms, we can't underestimate. Program attendance is still super high. This does not include outreach visits. We've had in the building 882 programs in 2004 with over 38,000 people. So those 38,000 people are coming in, coming downstairs, moving around the building. They're also perhaps coming from the senior center, or they're making a stopover at City Hall, or they're registering for a Parks and Rec program, or they're having a piece of pie at Hubbard, or meeting people to walk. I see a lot of people meet up in the Terrace parking lot to go for walks. This is definitely a downtown destination spot. Just for the sake of time, I'll talk about collection really quick. Since 2018 or so, our collection has been slowly shrinking. This is just the physical collection. And of course, some of this has to do with the total annual digital circulation that we offer through the Wisconsin Public Library Consortium. At the bottom graph here, you can see that that bottom line is digital materials. And where we took a huge dive in 2020 because of the pandemic, the digital materials bumped up, and they've been continuing to rise since then. So what we're not necessarily counting as physical visitors in our building are people that are still using the website, and maybe they're visiting the library at a park or during another outreach visit, or the library is coming to them at their senior living site. One of the big things that we look at in terms of our collection and its shrinking size is the demand that puts on materials that we don't own. So the holds from 2017 to 2024 graph shows the incoming and outgoing holds. So this is the picture of those red buckets. As a part of the South Central Library System, we share materials with over 50 libraries. And people in Middleton know what they like to read. They like physical books. They place a lot of holds. We're a very well-educated community that values print materials and reading and literacy across all ages. And the smaller that our collection gets, the more that we have to borrow from other libraries. So whereas once we were a net lender, now we're a net borrower. And this impacts our Dane County funding formula. These numbers of how our inventory versus our use all go into our reimbursement from the county. It also impacts our operational workflow and how many people we have working. We can have volunteers to help assist pull things off of our shelf and then have staff process those to make them available on the hold shelves for patrons or to send them out. But we're not able to have volunteers actually process materials that are incoming because of confidentiality reasons and security for our internal catalog. So that means that we need to have more staff that are processing those internal incoming holds. That's just one example. Just a refresher on our intergovernmental partnerships. As a public library, we follow the state statute chapter 43. That lines out our governance and our funding, how the board is appointed. We work with Dane County on providing nearly half of our funding formula. This year, 2024, was the first year that we surpassed $1 million in our reimbursement formula. That is also tied to the local Middleton City Council municipal tax resolution, and we do that every year. The library is a member of the South Central Library System. Those 50 libraries cover more than 7 counties. And we all follow the public Department of Public Instruction standards based on population. You may have heard or will hear that we are a tier 3 library. Tier 3, 1, 2, and 3 are based on population. And we are considered a tier 3 library, and that comes with a band of standards that we have to follow in order to be considered a tier 3. The original space needs in 2015 for the library identified just over 100,000 square feet dedicated to just the library. That's way above and beyond the tier 3 standard. So you'll see a difference of just over 20,000 square feet less than that, right about around 80 is what we're looking at right now as we talk about the square footage needed for the library. Just a quick comparison to some of our neighbors, because our funding is all collaterally tied. One of our goals, although this isn't a policy or procedure per se, but we want as a county and all public libraries in the county to grow at approximately the same pace. So that way, when we're sharing materials, we're not swinging one way real hard or the other. There's a lot of different funding mechanisms that happen at the county level and that happen with boards locally to help ease that swing or transition. So like, for example, when Fitchburg came online with a brand new library, they'd never had a library before. There was quite a bit of action around that formula to try to ease the burden on Madison and some of the other larger libraries like Middleton so that there wouldn't be such a swing in funding. But as you can see, we are definitely not keeping up. And they knew this 10 years ago, even before my tenure as director. So I have literally been talking about this project the whole time I've been here. this is a really special time in our history to really make a positive difference, not just for the people who work and live here now, but for future generations. So when I look at the comparisons here, I know that Middleton residents and library users deserve way more than 24,000 or 2,400 square feet dedicated to kids. That's hardly anything at all. Especially as we look at Sun Prairie, this includes their expansion that they're currently going under. Will have 13,000 square feet dedicated to their use space. So, the big deficiencies in all three buildings were definitely demonstrated in the MEP analysis. We know that for sure. We also have the CIVMIC ADA audit that found faults in all of our buildings. And we also know that we're working with the adopted sustainability goals, which are ambitious, but also realistic. Anything, other comments on deficiencies? Okay.
You said that there's more digital it's being read on the internet.
There are.
How does that affect your space needs then? Is it gonna reduce them? Or
So,
you're increasing your space needs because of the other programs you have?
great question. The digital increase in use is slightly, as you can see in the graph here on the right, related to the slight downturn of print materials. But right now, if you look at our collection size is much, much smaller than it used to be. So our collection size has shrunk, which shifts some of that demand or forces it to go digitally because we don't have the print book anymore, but you can get it digitally. Or what's happening is that people are borrowing more materials from other libraries. So that first section, when you first walk into the library on your right, that's all white shelving, that's all holds. If you go to Wanakee or Verona or Oregon, their holds section is like a quarter of the size. So that tells us that the print physical book and print collections are still very important to Middleton, and we're not keeping up with the collection size per capita, physical collection size per capita. So not only do we need to be able to grow the collection, but we also need to have the ability to balance that people space. So right now we are basically sacrificing the collection, relying heavily on digital support so that we can accommodate the growth of our programs and the need for gathering spaces.
And then initially you made the statement when you first started out that something about the library on these space needs was have to increase 143%, the senior center 45%, and the city hall 50%. Where did those numbers come from?
Those are the numbers that our consultants have been working on with staff as well as the committees for each of the three buildings. So that's the detailed spreadsheet summarized in just a % increase.
Have those numbers changed at all since we started this?
Primarily, they have shifted a bit for the senior center and city hall because we started in 2019 under different circumstances and different times. So they've changed slightly. They decreased dramatically by the library's work to really hone in on the numbers because their original study was done by a different consultant that had identified 100,000 square feet, and that was reduced to 80.
That original total for the square footage also included things like an amphitheater for 300 people, a very, very large area for stroller parking. So when we are looking to find efficiencies, especially amongst the shared spaces, the meeting spaces and larger empty rooms and how we gather is definitely a place where there's a lot of opportunity.
I don't know how much time we have, but between you and Tammy and the visits we've made to other facilities, are there items that you haven't mentioned today that you really want to be sure we accommodate in whatever we build for the future?
One of the things that we talked about probably more recently was taking a look at our ability to service more individuals with dementia and cognitive issues. We do that now in a limited way, but because of the design of the building, the lack of a designated space and area to accommodate that, one of the things we talked about was perhaps adding on an adult day center specialized area that would have its own staff. What tends to happen now, honestly, is people sometimes think that we are a care facility and they'll drop off someone who's suffering from Alzheimer's. And then thinking they can go do their errands, thinking they can get a much needed break. And then, that becomes very tricky for us because it's not a secured building. People can wander out. And if we're not aware that that person might be suffering from that issue. So being able to address that in a more proactive way, I think benefits us, benefits those caregivers who are really stressed out right now. More and more people are taking care of people in their home because of the cost. And because they want to, it's their loved one, it's mom or dad. So that's an area that we have always experienced difficulty in, that people sometimes probably don't realize.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Oh, of the visits we've made to other facilities and other than what you've
Katie, thank you.
mentioned today, are there things you'd like to be sure we accommodated in the facility?
I think when I'm thinking of accommodations, most of those would come with the design and architect process. Traffic patterns throughout the building approach, how are we using that shared space? In New Berlin, it was very eye-opening and exciting to see their community rec center. And I wouldn't want that piece to completely fall away as we get real busy with the other three entities here. I think that there's still a lot of potential for a space like that in Middleton, and it's very needed. I think about, as we're going through this project, where would Parks and Rec go to do their programming even after we built these buildings? And I think back to Oak Creek, and I really loved the shared space, but I really didn't care for the entry. So as we're looking at which side of the street a 4-story building goes on, obviously this side where the library is right now is a more desirable place for a larger building to go. That's also the building that's probably the best saved. So if we're looking at a larger building on this side, I would want to make sure that we're building it as big as we can within our means, but also keeping in mind that there's residential on this block that that will impact not just now, but longer into the future. This building will also outlive us all. So how can we build something that works within what we have?
I think it's important for us to enable to communicate to the community, know how long this building will be expected to last, these buildings, because that's, I think, an important part of the message.
From experience, I want to say, as long as they need to. Because this building is not necessarily, especially City Hall, is not necessarily considered I don't know what they would have said the lifetime was back in the 50s when they were in 60s when they were thinking about this, but we've definitely squeezed a lot of life out of it as we've needed to. Just a couple other things here as we wrap up, and we may have a couple more times or a couple more time for a couple more questions. Just taking a quick look at our timeline. Today, March 20th, is this meeting. We are pretty much meeting every week at this point to talk about this. We'll take a break for spring break, of course, but then come back at it in April. We will have April 17th. We'll focus on costs and financing. We'd had
That's
hoped.
the next scheduled meeting here is
Yeah.
April 17th?
Yes, we had hoped to be able to have that this meeting. So thank you for indulging our presentation today. And then May 22nd is the May meeting, and that will most likely be the final meeting of this group in this formation. June 3rd, we're hoping to make a presentation recommendations to the council. Here's just some thoughts on what that recommendation will include. So as you're beginning to hone in on some of these ideas and starting to look at how can we craft a motion for a recommendation, what should this recommendation include? We're looking at potentially 2 to 3 options, maybe more. That will go under deliberation. We're recommending undertaking of a community engagement strategy, incorporating underground parking, using setbacks on building heights, including bike and pedestrian and transit to look at streetscaping, and any other recommendations on designs that would be able to meet the sustainability goals. So these are just things to keep in mind as we're starting to hone in on a final.
Can I just jump in really quick here? Under the thoughts, the bullet points that Jocelyn just read through, those are things that I just found going through your old minutes. It seemed like those were things that there was some alignment around. We're not trying to put words in your mouth or tell you what your recommendation would look like, but those were just things that were included in many of the minutes that we reviewed.
All right, any other questions? We have maybe 120 seconds.
So the 17th, is it an hour and a half schedule instead of the normal?
Yes, we're hoping because of the meatiness of the topic, presenting costs, and then also going over potential financing strategies, we're hoping that everybody could make 90 minutes available for that meeting on the 17th. And that is a week earlier than our normal, just because that worked better for staff and a couple of the committee members as well. I didn't hear from anybody that wasn't available on the 17th, so I'm hoping that will work out.
Do you mind just showing that schedule?
Oh, I just closed it.
Oh,
I'm sorry. And were there any questions on Zoom? I didn't see any, but just checking.
So on the 22nd, then that is where we'll try to come up with what we're going to send to common council at that meeting.
Yes,
Mhm.
and in talking with our communications liaisons, that's Andy Lyons, as well as our internal communications manager, along with city administration. Because this project is going to potentially require a referendum, as well as an intense public engagement strategy, we want to be sure that there is time, that there are enough options left on the table, so that this committee is not selecting one singular option to put forward. Because if we were to take one singular option to our community and they said, thanks, but no thanks, we still need to have some other options available. So we were thinking that maybe it would make sense for this body to recommend 2 or 3 options to the council. You may have a preferred choice. You may have things that you want to put forward that you like, that you particularly like about one option or dislike. So your recommendation doesn't necessarily have to be as clean as we like this one the best. It can be, a list of things for the council to consider after all of the work that your group has done.
When they generate these numbers, one of the options we had was remodeling the library for the senior center. Are they going to generate numbers, the cost of doing that?
Yes, that will be included. So each of the options will have a cost estimate associated with it.
and the cost of tearing down buildings.
Demolition will be included in those as well, yes.
Would the phasing also be included in each option? I know just for like high level phasing, like this might take two steps that like Paul presented the other week. Does that seem
Paul, can you include the phasing involved with each of the options as
Just-
well? So,
Sure.
just high level? I mean, you know, this group moves out, seeing if they need to relocate one or two or three or five times, it might be helpful, you know.
And would that also include the avoided energy costs or the payback periods for sustainability features? I mean, I know the school district's been able to do that, in coming up with their plans to move forward.
You want me to answer this?
yes, if you.
Yeah, there will be, very similar to what that first phase was, when there was the MEP, the different levels.
Mhm.
There was a cost associated with that. And then there would be a high level energy analysis to show you what the energy costs are for that, and then how that impacts your utility bills. So that will accompany this effort, you know, at a very high level. And then, as Jocelyn mentioned, when there's a team selected in the future and you're working with options, then there will be more of a detailed analysis engaging, focus on energy, looking at energy modeling of the buildings and really honing in on this. But you will have some high level information.
And that's data we'll have before anything goes forward to the community then. Okay, great.
All right, any other questions?
We were holding off on the parks and rec, like adding, they're using some space in the senior center. Are we gonna try to add extra, like pad it up a little bit to have a little bit for them, or?
That is a great question. So we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, but under the options where the Parks and Recreation Department would potentially lose their space in the senior center, there will need to be space that can either be built in to the senior center for their temporary use, especially on evenings and weekends, or City Hall could accommodate that. The library would not be able to accommodate that additional space because of the funding issues where libraries are not able to charge a program fee and the rec department does. If the senior center building were to remain intact in the option that ends up being selected, the recreation department could use that building in the short term until such time that we were able to plan and program for an actual recreation center.
I think the key would be short term,
Yes.
which often in government turns into decades. Because and the real strong concern there would be that we would still own a building and be maintaining a building that we just said wasn't meeting the needs. So
That is something that Tammy has been working with Kylie, the Parks and Rec director, on a little bit, just in terms of like providing information about maintenance costs and utility bills in particular, because the rec center, if they're taking on those operational costs for the entire facility, they need to be able to offset that with program revenue fees. And that would be a challenge for that building, just given the age and some of the issues that we're facing with it. We've also, we've floated a couple of other ideas about how, maybe there would be an opportunity that we could lease a floor of the building and use the other floor and try to get some lease revenue to help cover the cost to operate that building, but it's not an inexpensive building just due to the size and the age and some of the inefficiencies. How many boilers do you have in that building?
10.
There are 10 boilers in that building currently, so it's a challenge.
I guess that would be a reason to like maybe just add extra square footage somewhere, just to, until you guys need it, and you could just like use it.
yeah, I think that's a really good example of let's build it bigger than we think we need it. Because inevitably there will be ways that we will use it.
Yeah.
Whether it's just storage, like the lower level of the library for 10 years until they renovated, or to help grow and build another service.
And we've never talked with any other communities that have said, oh, we accidentally built our facility too big. It's the opposite approach usually is, "Oh, we should have planned for this, so.
Okay.
And the design of these buildings are gonna be sufficient storage space, is that part of this cost and size of the building?
There is storage included in the buildings. You know, we talked about it with the director, the department heads.
Any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none, I'll close the session. Thanks, everyone, and see you all again on the 17th.